Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Permaculture Gardening Live with me, Matt Powers. All right, so this is a monthly live webinar and Q&A with Permaculture Gardening, my online course. But this month, as you probably have noticed, it's open to everyone. Everyone is included. It is public. I want people to see what we're talking about. I want people to be aware. I've noticed there's a lot of posts online about what's hard, what people are going through, what challenges they're facing in their garden. And I just wanted to put this out there so we can help some people. All right, so let us just go over here. I'm going to quickly set up the link right now so that I can see your comments right over here. All right. Okay. All right. Turn the music off. All right. So, welcome everyone. The chat is open. Please feel free to check in and introduce yourself. And so, this is Permaculture Gardening Live. The Saturday morning, lots of people are busy. This is going to be here for replay. And that's also part of our course. Everyone can watch it whenever they get to it. So I do it live, and then there's always replays. So today we're talking about soil solutions and secrets. Very specific things that are going to change your relationship with soil. Do you have issues with your soil that you're dealing with right now? If you do, you're definitely going to want to watch this episode of our live Q&A, because if you have soil pests, plant pests, fungal issues with your plants or your soils, then you're going to want to watch this. We're going to go over that in depth. We're going to go over the difference between orchard compost and garden compost, and perhaps even fruiting and growth compost, because they'll be different. And then we're going to be talking about why EM and Bokashi solutions rock. Because a lot of times they're like so needful to have in your toolkit. And we'll talk about that exactly. So we're going to be referring to information found in the Permaculture Student 2, which you can download as an ebook for free. So stay tuned for all that information. This book I wrote with over 20 different peer reviewers, and it was with this group of peer reviewers that I was able to create something that has, gotten approval by so many different amazing mentors of mine, used by them in their own programs that they've been teaching for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And they're now using this internationally. They're using this to teach their top students. They're recommending this to their top students. Why? Because they all participated in it. They all gave their say, and I just worked, for them all, essentially. I wrote the book, which was my understanding, and then I brought it to all the peer reviewers, and then they were like, you need to read this. And then I read everything, and then I found all these interconnections between all the things that they suggested I read. And then I brought all my insights back to them, and then they had discussions, and over the course of 2 years, we created this amazing, amazing document that I feel is a human right to know. And that's why I have it for free on my website, thepermaculturestudent.com. So we'll be referring to stuff from this in today's soil solutions and soil secrets. And those of you who are my students who are here, thank you for joining us. Please identify that you're a student when you ask a question, so that I can find those questions and answer them. It is still our live Q&A, though there will be other people joining us, I'm sure. And of course, you've already got the book. You're already reading through the book, I know. If you're one of my students, it's included as well in the program, as well as the workbook and a bunch of other excellent ebooks. So, first things first, let's talk about what soil is in a really quick, condensed manner, and then dive into potential problems that you could face and why. And then we'll go into the solutions and then some of the things that people just don't know. Okay, so soil back in the day was just thought to be the clay, the sand, the silt, and the soluble nutrients, right? They're always measuring the soluble nutrients in water. They're shaking up and looking at it, right? So, what we know today is probably the most important part is the organic matter and the soil life. And that's not discounting some of the things we'll talk about. There's caveats to that, right? Right, right. Life just in the micro, just as in the macro, requires minerals and nutrients to survive and thrive. So we can apply a lot of common sense here because we're animals and we understand these things. So do they need minerals? A full, spectrum of minerals in an appropriate levels? Yeah, they do. Can they unlock them from the sand, silts, clays, pebbles, rocks, and like Dr. Elaine Ingham always talks about? They can. They absolutely can. But there are different soils in different places in the wild, right? In the fullest extent of nature, there's truly bizarre things and exceptions. And Dr. Elaine Ingham's talking about the soil surveys that are taken down to sometimes 20 feet deep, as Dan Kittredge has pointed out. And so it's like, yeah, there's everything in that 20 feet. You know what I mean? And those assays, those, and then I've also heard that, well, from Professor David Montgomery, he's a geomorphologist, that there are some, you know, purely sand, soils where it's just sand. And it really doesn't have anything else. So so it's really incredibly important to like understand all these things from the context from which people are speaking. So we've evolved with our understanding of it. And most of the soil conversations that people are having, they're talking about agricultural soils. And so when they're talking about the soils are depleted, it's like, well, are we going to like the Himalayas and like working on those soils? Mm, I mean, there's acid rain, there's erosion, there's climate change. Those things are happening and speeding up, but but that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about we're losing soils, we're talking about the agricultural spaces and the things that we're doing with tillage, with chemicals, with creating anaerobic like tillage compaction layers. You know what I mean? And exporting all the minerals and nutrients regularly. So we've got these soils that literally don't have those minerals because they've been removed and because they keep putting down things that, destroy the soil, remove those things. There's all these crazy chemicals that are used on soils that cause all these things to happen that basically, undo everything. And so we've got soil in an absolute crisis. It's contaminated, it's eroding, it's lost its life, it's dead. And because of the basic fact that soil is the medium through which all life cycles, that's what the organic matter component is. It's like what will become life and what returns, to the soil. We have to come to this realization in our culture and even as gardeners that we are that soil, that that soil is our future body because that soil creates the plant that we eat that becomes our bodies. So the minerals in the soil, both like soluble minerals and non-soluble minerals, those areas, those banks must both be rich and accessible. And the plants need to have a full spectrum of soil biology to communicate with, to create the economy to access and properly manage all those resources. So we need to provide all these things in the soil for the best plants. And plants, the way they work, it's very simple. Plants pick and choose. They choose what they want when they want it in the amount they want it. And sometimes it's a little teeny bit of arsenic, and sometimes it's a little bit of, you know, this and that. And you're like, wait, arsenic, isn't that poison? But in teeny, teeny amounts, we need it. And so we need the full spectrum, we need even gold and, all these different things. And these plants are taking it up in little trace amounts here, a little there, a little, and creating balance. And it's that full spectrum of balance that we also need in our diet. And what's going on in our diet when we take food into our bodies is the microbiome in our bodies, the microbiology, just like the ruminants are digesting our food, and they're picking and choosing and taking out the minerals and nutrients that we need. So again, it's like setting the stage for the microbiology to choose wisely for us so that we can build our bodies at the greatest health, the greatest expression. So it's really important. And if you're like, Matt, I don't really get this whole building our bodies out of this thing. Well, look at the epigenetics. We've recently discovered that there are these very tiny molecules that are not destroyed that are in food that actually go down and they connect with our cells. And those molecules literally go to the cell walls, and they interact with the cell walls, and they change the expression of the proteins that are produced by that cell. So we're epigenetically modifying our bodies, the expression of our being with the communication, the information that we get from our food. So it's really imperative that that food has its full spectrum of choice, that we honor it and we don't force it, because traditional agriculture is salts. And so you're salting the earth first of all, and then you're watering it in, and it's becoming liquid. So it's soluble fertilizer, and that soluble fertilizer gets uptaken by the plant without any choice. There's no sophistication, there's no yes, no, there's no choice in the matter, there's no consent. And so that plant is force fed, and that's why you get these giant plants, and then people are like, that plant has no nutrition. You're like, but it looks so good. And so this is the real problem with our current offering in the grocery store and from the farmers, bounty in our so many of our countries, is that there's a ton of food, but there's not that much nutrition. And so people are eating a ton to get a little nutrition, and their bodies are thinking they're starving. And that's what many people believe is causing them to gain that weight. It's a survival mechanism. People put on weight when they're about to starve. It's like the bears, before they hibernate, and they put on all that weight. And so it's really a crisis that we've created. And then you look at soils and history, and if you actually go and read the original documents, you'll find that George Washington thought the country was going to fail because of soil loss. So did Thomas Jefferson. And George Washington was trying to focus on contour plowing at the end of his life. Pretty epic. But Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, all these guys were concerned with soil as well. And so we go back in time, and even the Greeks were talking about soil erosion. And then you look at Roman times, they created the Sahara Desert, killing all those animals that lived there in the Colosseum, specifically the predators. And then they spread out agriculture in those areas and basically created deserts, tillage, creating deserts in those brittle climates. And then the only stable place left, because they had just destroyed all the soils surrounding Rome in Europe and in northern Africa, was Egypt. And they conquered Egypt so that they could have steady harvest. And the only reason Egypt was able to do all that was because the Nile's flooding every year brought another wave of silt, mud, just like, the Chinampas are always bringing the Lodo Negro, the black mud, on top of those floating islands. It's beautiful. It's amazing. My wife's documentary is almost complete on her trip to Mexico, documenting, among many other things, the Chinampas. And De la Chinampas is an incredible documentary that is coming out soon. So stay tuned for that. You can learn more about that on my website, thepermaculturestudent.com. And so we've got this crisis where history has actually been driven by soil loss, actually. So the Middle East was the diaspora from that was caused by the soil loss and the collapse and the droughts. The droughts were caused by they started channeling the water out as much as possible, and they basically drained the entire thing. And because they did so much hydrological manipulation of the landscape, they just dried it out, and they were tilling as well. And so they killed the soil, air, dried everything out, and it just destroyed a brutal climate. And so they went to Europe and did that. They went to Northern Africa and did that. It went to China, or started in China at the same time period, depending on how we interpret that history. We don't really know. But it started in China at the same time period and started creating deserts there. That's what the Loess Plateau was. But we know that it was reversed with perennials and with earthworks. So we can do this. We can take things back. We can change things. This soil story has solutions, and there are some secrets there that can help us supercharge it and speed things up. So that, in a nutshell, is what soil is, where soil has been, some of the problems with soil. There's, of course, more detail. There's, of course, more instances. There's, of course, more specifics. But we're just going to start there because today we're talking in specific about soil solutions for permaculture gardeners. A lot of that information I go into depth in the Advanced Permaculture Student Online, which is featured in my YouTube channel. I think there's like 60 videos. But if you are aware of how big that course actually is, it's, over 160 hours. So the 60 videos on there is like a little toenail of what's actually in the course. So this, anyway, that's just one of my courses. So thank you so much for being here. Let me see if there are any questions before I dive into this next thing. Hey, everybody. Good to see everyone. I'm going to say hello. All right. Very cool. Nice to see everyone. Kitten, Bruno, Indica. Hey, it is nice to see you all. All right. Indica Dogo says we're big into aquaponics and new to regenerative agriculture and permaculture on new land, and next year want to try to do the sunken plant beds like the natives did. Wow. All right. So when and where do we do sunken beds? When and where do we do raised beds? And even if it's not like with the sides on it, doing raised beds is a thing we do in certain climates. It has to do with the humidity. So we do sunken beds when we're trying to have water go in constantly, to roll in, flow in, and focus in our gardening beds. And then the raised beds are in the more humid climates where maybe if you did that sunken bed, it would get all fungally and just decompose really fast. You know what I mean? And you need that airflow. So if you go to someplace like Missouri, you might be growing your tomatoes on a mound or on, top of a hugel or something where it's raised really high, and then in full sun, you know what I mean? Lots of aeration, so that you avoid a lot of those issues. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Oh, that is good to hear. But you know what, Indica, don't wait to take the class with your teenagers, take the class as a whole family. The reality is, it's like your teenagers will go out into the world with such a greater knowledge if you do it all together. Um, New Mexico. New Mexico's got some amazing sites. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Hey, Dusty. Hey, Alec. Hey, Douglas. It is so great to see everyone coming out to watch and join us. So we've just given the overview of what we're going to be talking about. Let's dive into the first topic area really quick, talking about soil, pests, fungal issues, and more. So what do we do in organic gardening, the official organic gardening and official organic farming, when we have pests? Well, it seems like there's two routes, right? There are people who just like are going to not directly attack the pests. And then there are people that will directly attack the pest, right? And in the direct attack of the pest, you kind of have like these kind of questionable things, quite often. You're like, well, if it's hurting that, is it going to hurt other things? And if it's, you know what I mean? There's a huge concern there around chemical use, around sneaking things in, around bending the rules. And so people are very nervous to go over to this side where you're actually killing the pests. And so some people, squish the pests by hand. Some people are spraying it up with a hose. But some people are focusing on building the soil and just improving the soil and letting that plant maybe be the bait crop, or they chop it down and then compost it really quick because that plant was indicated to not be so healthy. There is a new route that I have learned about that can feed the plant and the same time melt the pests and the fungal blight issues and the powdery mildews, which is also, mold and fungus and all that stuff. So they're all chitin. They're all chitin. The cell walls of fungi are chitin. The exoskeletons of arthropods, the multi-jointed, that's what arthropod means. And microarthropods are made of chitin. So if you have chitinase, which is a digestive enzyme that breaks those down in compost and the digestion of earthworms and wigglers, we have an opportunity. We have an interesting door just open. And this is something I didn't know until I was filming the Advanced Permaculture Student Online. And it was really kind of wild because I was getting hinted at it here and there by other people. And then one of the last people I was videoing, who was worked at an insectary farm where they grow insects to help beneficial insects to help people. And he was like, yeah, this insect frass, if you compost it, creates chitinase. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, because it breaks down. So something needs to break it down. So something's going to produce chitinase and break it down. And it was like, whoa, okay. And so it opened this door where I realized that an earlier speaker had been talking about using insect frass to feed to worms. And that insect frass became chitinase rich worm castings. And it was those worm castings turned into a compost tea, and scaling up and feeding those specific microbes. They got really dialed in. This one group dialed into exactly what foods amp up exactly this. And so they're on top of this. And we go over this in depth in my advanced course. But everyone can do this too. Just not to an amped up wild level, perhaps. But we all can deter, melt, cure all these problems. Phone. Hold on. Let me stop that. All right. And so we all can bring this up by scaling it up in a compost tea brewer, by feeding it properly. And then we can be spraying it on our trees, digesting those problems. This is why people have recommended compost tea, if it's done right, for the craziest of issues. And you're like, wait, that's crazy. How is that even possible that it could fight a blight issue? And what it's doing is it's breaking down the cell walls of that fungi. It's melting them. And the examples we have of this are people were actually spraying this stuff on bark beetles and bark beetle ridden trees and having the trees come back so much that the sap squirted out of the holes, of the boreholes, and it pushed their eggs out and pushed them out. So if we feed, yes, Indica, if we feed the bug skeletons to our compost, thermophilic compost or vermicompost, we end up, and yes, if you just do an anaerobic water bath of mushroom conchs, you can create chitinase because it's breaking down, something's breaking it down, and it's stinky and gross. But nonetheless, it does work. I've heard anecdotally that it does work. People have done that, and it makes sense. Something is breaking it down. It would have to break down the chitin somehow. That is how you spell chitinase. Just have fun. You got it, buddy. All right. So this was a breakthrough that is kind of, hidden from everyone. But how many of us know someone, everyone, right? Know someone that is facing some of these issues? And if we don't have this stuff become common knowledge, it's going to hold back organic gardening. It's going to hold back permaculture gardening, holistic gardening. And yes, don't spray your bees, don't spray your beneficial insects with this stuff, no doubt. But it's going to soak in. It's just going to be awesome. It's going to be great. It's going to feed the soil life. It's going to feed everything. It's going to cause a charge. The plant's going to get supercharged. It's going to love it. But we got to talk about this stuff. You know what I mean? We got to spread this kind of stuff. And so that's why I share this information with you. That's why I share it in this public format, and that's why when I'm asked about this stuff, I talk about it because, I mean, man, if you're trying to live off the land, you need this information. It's so simple, so easy. If you're doing black soldier fly larvae and you're, have a lot of that stuff going on, you're breaking down your food, you're creating chicken feed, and then you're also working with all the pupate and you're composting that, and then you're controlling pests on the land. Super cool, super awesome. And it's, in the end, we have to recognize that it is that second option that we need to improve our soil. So when a plant is stressed, that's indicative that it is not getting full nutrition. So we need to add the bone dust. I mean, the rock dust, excuse me. We need to add maybe the seaweed or the kelp meal. We need to be adding the soil food web life, the compost teas. We need to be adding our vermicompost worm castings. We need to be bringing in as much as diversity as possible. I'm not one of those guys that are like, just get bunny manure and that's all you need, or just get kelp. It's the answer. It's really not the answer. And we instinctively know it. It's like the greatest diversity is going to give your plant the greatest number of options. And if your plant is, intelligent, and there are ways, we can talk about this another time, but there are ways to create intelligent plants, intelligent seeds. They will pick and choose wisely. And so those resources that they didn't need, the mycelium that's allowing them to uptake things 10,000 times higher. I mean, that's literally what AMF, arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, is doing in terms of phosphorus uptake. So if you have something like this, which is a nice big bag of Daikon Radish. So let's look inside. You guys like Daikon Radish to eat? Well, it doesn't matter if you like to eat it or not. Daikon Radish, this seed, so cool. The reality of this seed is it bores down like 1 to 2 feet deep, sometimes this thick, and it is going to aerate your soil. It's like biological tillage. And then while it's growing, it's pulling in phosphorus from all around it. And so that phosphorus becomes readily available in the organic matter to the soil food web and the plant roots when it breaks down and composts in place. So that is why you see daikon as a cover crop. That is why you see daikon radishes sold commercially, where people have bred them and then patented their seed, so that they're like super good at going really deep and scrubbing a lot and scrounging a lot. That's the word. Scrounging a lot of phosphorus. So it's really, really cool. And then if you're doing it in a mix with our good friend, where are you? Oh, there you are. Cowpeas. So these are Johnny's cowpeas right here. But if you've got cowpeas, check it out. So if you've got cowpeas, these are going to grow so fast, bring you so much biomass, but then they're going to bring the most nitrogen and the most biomass as a companion plant. That's what was tested when it was compared to as a companion plant with corn. Corn's a C4 grass, so all the sugars in corn, all the sugars in sugarcane, and in our good friends, sorghum. Are you going to come out, sorghum? Come here. Don't spill out. That's not cool. Come here. Ah! All right, here we go. So sorghum, these are C4 grasses. So they're taking in way more carbon, which means they're making sugar at a higher rate. And that sugar is primo cash in the soil food web economy. So if you're growing these things to feed your soil, to chop and drop, to put it back into your soil, to compost as a sheet mulching, living, composting, cycling, holistic permaculture gardening system, where you're not going to the store and just dumping stuff down there and hoping that the person that prepared that for you understood your unique situation, because I guarantee the soil food web knows what to do. They know what to do. Let them do the tillage with the plants. Let them aerate your soils. Maybe do some broad forking in there, loosen it up a little bit, but don't disturb the layers. You can get some air down there, of course. Don't disturb those layers. Let those layers work. Let them communicate. Water in the compost tea. Let them go in there and break it up and myceliate, and start the conversation in economy. And before you know it, you will have soils. And I know this because I've done this in one season, 3 months, that go from your shoulder down to your hand. Just crazy, like 3 feet deep. Nuts. And I've done this, and I've had third generational farmers over at my house digging in my soil and just being like, what is this? They live 3 hills over, meanwhile. They've got, orchards. They've never seen anything like it. So this really, really, really works when you take not just the soil biology, the good soil that comes in, building it all yourself, but also the plant communications with very specific cover crops. I would add into that mix buckwheat. Buckwheat scrounges nitrogen. That's where it gets its protein from cowpeas. So it actually steals from the cowpeas. This is real. And then the cowpeas double down. They're like, fine. And they work like twice as hard. And so they're like, it's a crazy increase in nitrogen production for that area, especially if you're chopping and dropping. And remember, if you're taking those seeds out, the seeds have the packet of energy. Remember when we dry plants out in composting and they're just standing carbon when they're dried out? All the nutrition, all the nutrients went into the seed. That's why seeds are so high in nitrogen. That's why seeds are so powerful when they explode. They've got all the nutrition wrapped up into it. So we have an opportunity to change our soils, but we also have an opportunity now with some of these soil seekers to protect our soils. Now, let's go a little bit further. What if, and many of us are in the situation, we've got soils that we're not trustworthy of? We think that someone sprayed something. We're worried about what has happened in the past. We just want to relax and know that it's taken care of or that it's pushing in the right direction. So there are things that we can do. Number one, increasing organic matter. Always, always, always. Number two, increasing the diversity of the soil food web. That'll happen when you bring in the organic matter naturally. But when you bring it in purposefully, you're bringing in the mycelium, you're bringing in the compost teas, you're bringing in all the minerals, the rock dust, all those things. It amps it up even faster, even greater. Let me refer to that. What was I just saying? I'm just gonna look here while you guys tell me what I was just saying. I'm gonna look over your questions. Okay, great question. Dynamic accumulators. Dynamic accumulators don't exist. It's a term that was promoted by Robert Kurek, who has spent his entire time trying to stamp it out since he released it. He feels responsible about it. But the reality is, he went back and researched comfrey more, and in the wrong soils, they accumulate lead in very high levels. So if you're using it as a medicine, you're getting high doses of lead. So he got even more concerned, and he's kind of just sharing as much as possible on roots, on caveats, on ways that people can have a more complicated understanding of this, because dynamic accumulators, all that data, where's that coming from? Well, most of it's coming from USDA labs. What's their soil like? Well, that determines everything. What they can uptake is always facilitated by the fungi and bacteria. It's like the same situation with cannabis. Did you know that there's only one farm that medical, federal, information can be updated around cannabis? So they're like, there's no medical value of cannabis. Yeah, because on the farm in Mississippi, the one farm that they'll look at for cannabis, they make the crappiest weed in the world. It doesn't look like cannabis to anyone that ever has seen cannabis. It looks like they just found like a garden weed and said, this must be cannabis. And they started testing that, and it must be a joke that was played on the federal government a long time ago, because they're like, oh yeah, you want weed? Here it is. You know what I mean? Because that's why. And it's the same concern I have. There are these satellite, sites all over the nation, but it's like potatoes are here, not here, 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 here. So the conclusions that they have are limited. And are they growing organically to get these conclusions? Are they growing in compost? Are they growing with the full panel of soil life? Are they tilling? Is it no-till? All of these things are going to make such a great difference that all the data that we've gotten about nutrition, it's like, I love John Jevons, totally. But that whole thing where he's calculating the nutrition, that goes out the window when you go onto some of these biodynamics, some of these permacultural, some of these, deep organic, regenerative organic farms. That one corn cob is the same as 14 other corn cobs, even the organic, you know what I mean? And it's because of the soil, the mycelium, the relationships that they can form. So I kind of have like a giant salt shaker with me always when it comes to data. And so yeah, I always worry about that. So I was talking about buckwheat. So I would always have buckwheat in there to scrounge from the cowpeas. I would also have sorghum in there because it grows way more than corn. It grows like 5 tillers. So it's way more prolific. It has like a whole bunch of things going on. I think it might be better at sequestering carbon because it was used to create sugars. Even now, it's used to create sugar syrup. So corn, no one's making sugar syrup out of corn like they are out of traditionally, because there's a process to turn corn into that. It's not, doesn't lend itself that easily to it like sugarcane or sorghum. So having all those things in there, chopping and dropping them to the soil, feeding the soil web that supercharge at the end of the year, so that they're breaking all that down, and that first frost comes and seals that all up, and it's amazing stuff. So I really, really value partnerships with the plants. That's all I wanted to say at the end of that, and that's what I was forgetting and had to remind myself of. So, do you all feel like you've got another tool or set of tools in your arsenal to be able to fight all those problems, to be able to better prepare, protect against those problems, and eventually just make those problems so they never come back? Hopefully that's the case. Try to do it in a short period of time, try to condense it. And so let's look at the next one. Yeah, you can juice sorghum, Indica Dogo. You can absolutely juice sorghum just like you would with a sugarcane juicing grinder. You know those presses? Eddie Garcia was one of them. Was one of the people who showed me how to use one of them. And my son and I were using it. It's amazing. It's so easy. So that's what I would use as well. The Amish, I wanted to film the Amish doing this, but they wouldn't allow it. But I wanted to show them juicing sorghum in large amounts and then turning into syrup, because they still do this. So it's really cool that these technologies are all still around. They can totally be updated. That's the crazy thing. No one's doing this stuff. No one's fabricating new ways to juice and new. But so dive into this. I highly recommend it. And you know what? When it comes to Korean natural farming, always refer to my good friend Chris Trump. He is trained not only, in soil science from a university, but he learned with Dr. Elaine Ingham, and then he learned with Korean natural farming's creator, and then he's consistently taking workshops with him and taught. And teaching is the highest level of learning, and he's taught all over the world now. So Chris Trump, I highly recommend him. He's got online classes, online courses, and a Patreon that's rocking too. So sorghum, super easy to plant. You can plant a little bit and you'll get 5 heads from one seed. So you just plant a little bit and you get a ton. All right, let's look at the next thing. All right, so the difference between orchard and gardening compost. So let's look at this for a second. Uh-oh. So the thing is, when it comes to perennials and annuals, for our foods, for the most part, we have grasses and annuals being more bacterial, and fruits and trees and perennials being more, it's backwards, I know, but this is in my book. And so there's an overlap though, because bacterial dominant soils are dominated by nitrates, and ammonium dominated soils are acidic. So bacterial and then acidic, they both have different forms of nitrogen, and they both feed different time periods of growth. So the fruiting requires a different form of nitrogen than the growth. And we might have seen this before. So your friend gave you a ton of chicken manure, you put it in your garden, you saw someone do this. and it just grew nothing but growth, no fruit. So tons of corn, big corn. It never made any ears. The tomatoes grew like crazy, but they didn't form any fruits. And it's like, what happened? Well, it was all nitrate. So it was hot, and you needed the other stuff. You needed the ammonium. You needed the not hot manure. And so it's that balance that is achieved in a no-till situation. Because as Dr. Lane Ingham has pointed out, every 3 micrometers that they tested, it swings like greatly. Could be from pH 4 to pH 9, could be stable, it could be close. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason. It's all over the map. And that's wonderful for the soil food web because they're navigating all around. They're picking and choosing what they need when. Great hair, Matt. And so they're picking and choosing what they want when from where. And so having that great spectrum allows them to also have things that are only unlocked in the super acidic or the super alkaline, because certain things are only unlocked there. So we have to understand that there's this spectrum. There's this spectrum that we want in our no-till zones, but then there's also this broader spectrum that's the averages of all those pHs that we get when we do this shake test, that we do the water pH test. And that aggregate is overall more acidic in the old growth. And then as you get closer to the beach, as you get closer to disturbance, it becomes more and more bacterial. So that's the swing of things. It goes from annuals into perennials into old growth forest. And so we need to treat our compost in a similar fashion. We need to prepare things so that they are able to be our help at those moments. And so you can cue fruiting, you can cue growth, you can support these things. So a garden compost, I mean, most people have this. It's like a vermicompost. It's bacterial dominant. And then you also have thermophilic compost with a lot of greens and a lot of garden waste, a lot of kitchen waste. That also would be bacterial dominant. Lots of sugars, lots of easy things to break down, which favors the bacteria. And then on the flip side, if you are doing a woody compost, and this is super interesting because the way Michael Phillips, who is an expert on this, you would do a hot compost, and before it's done, you would add a ton of carbon and then leave it for an extended period of time so that it would slowly ease off and there would be larger portions of wood still. They would be inoculated and digested by mycelium, making the pile even further acidic and perennial oriented, tree compost, orchard compost oriented. So it's like a half hot, half moldering compost. It's like a combo. Very, very interesting. I learned about that recently. And so for those of us, I mean, we might be doing a woodier compost to create a more ammonium-rich compost that we could be using at the end of the season to get things to happily continue fruiting as like a feed. Not necessarily saying that like compost is a fertilizer or something like that. It feeds the soil food web, so the soil food web's happy, so they are able to extract and release more nutrition to the plants. And then we're able to have the exact compost our trees need, because if we're constantly giving our trees bacterial dominant compost, they're going to be unhappy and think they're out of place. They're going to be sending out all the wrong signals. So we really want to make sure that we feed these things, and they could be very close to each other if we are feeding them, because their roots, the plants, they're like, oh no, I got everything I need. and they don't feel like they are fighting or having to put out allelopathic elements into the soil food web to fight the neighbor. So there's a lot that can happen, and your spacing can start shrinking. Your plants can be growing closer together, as you've seen in my systems. All right. And I think there's the final section, then I'm going to jump into questions. All right. We're going to be talking about why EM is so awesome. So this is scaling up some EM. So this was 1 part EM, 1 part molasses, and 20 parts water. And so this right here, see how I've squished it so that there's no air in it, and the air is actually starting to appear in it. There wasn't any air in it. Let's see if we can do. Yeah, there wasn't any air in it to start with. And so it's going to expand and then condense and expand and condense as the microbes in it digest and switch different foods. So they're very, very interesting. And EM is short for effective microbes. So we're talking about yeast. We're talking about lab, which is lactic acid bacteria, and we're talking about purple non-sulfur bacteria. So PNSB is the short for that. So all this is in my book. So if you have questions, and then if you're like, I need to do this with a group, I'm going to have questions, join our course, Advanced Permaculture Student Online. It's only $50 a month, and it's lifetime access. So it's so worth it. It's over 640 people, over 70 educators, 160 hours of education, and we're doing a live run through. It's self-paced and live. So every year we go for, it was 4 months, but now it's going to be 10 months. There's a lot more material, and we're also pacing it out so everyone can stick together. But EM is a big part of what I've learned about in filming that course, because it has the ability to take our compost and make them so they don't get too hot. Now, why is this important? What happens when you have a giant compost heap and it gets up to 180 degrees and you have anaerobic pockets? Like you didn't move it at all. So there's airless pockets. Fire can happen. So why? Well, because there's alcohols produced by anaerobes, and this has happened. Compost heaps can catch on fire. And so this ferments the amino acids, and it turns them into, it ferments the nitrogenous components, the nitrogen, the nitrates, the ammoniums, and it ferments them into amino acids so they're readily available for plants to just slurp up. And so these and amino acids become proteins, right? So this is really powerful because it takes the first step. It helps us take the first step in digestion for the plants, because the plants are going to be, taking the amino acids that are formed in the process of the nitrogen fixing microbes and everything. You know about this? Well, the way legumes work is that they form these nodules, the nitrogen fixing nodules, and they actually fill up with amino acids. They take the sugars and the nitrogen from the atmosphere and combine them. And then when they're full and they're full bursting, they actually start releasing it back to the plant. The plant wants the amino acids. It doesn't want nitrogen directly. So this gives it to them directly. So that stinky chicken coop, spray it with EM. Digest that directly into soil-ready amino acids, and then gather that up and, make a new compost heap with it. And so, or spray it regularly, add some biochar, and you will not have stink from that space. And you will regularly just be building better and better soil below that. And it's also, all right, so what is yeast? Yeast is a way that we digest things in oxygenless environments, right? We're digesting sugars, it's our wines, it's our kombucha, And then we're looking at lactic acid bacteria. That's lactobacillus. That is like our food preservation. That's like the fermented foods. That is like pickling to a degree, sort of. That's an analog. But it's a way that we preserve foods. And then we look at purple non-sulfur bacteria and see how it feeds 4 different ways. It feeds off light. It feeds off of, it's just crazy. And so these things work together in such a way that they are preserving and speeding up. All right, so they're preserving certain aspects, the nutrition. They're speeding up certain aspects of decomposition. And in the end, they get out of the way. And because they're facultative, they do well in anaerobic and aerobic contexts. And because they get digested and eaten by the indigenous microorganisms, this doesn't stick around. It feeds the soil web. It stimulates the soil food web. It also stimulates aquatic biomes as well. So this is used in so many different instances. It's used as a cleaner. People are using EM for health and taking internally, very specific ones. I'm not saying this is one you take internally, but people are using this to do amazing things. And so this is a workaround. This is a very useful tool that if you don't have this, you might have serious issues. So like, let's say if you've got to do compost toilets and stuff. Oh yeah, and then going back to the composting, it won't go above 131, 129 Fahrenheit. I don't know what that's in Celsius off the top of my head, but it puts a ceiling on it so it doesn't get too hot, so your compost pile won't catch on fire. And then because the nitrogen isn't being gassed off, you don't have that ammonium smell. And so it's keeping all that nutrition. It's composting. You don't have to turn it as often, and you're able to add that to the garden sooner. So it's incredibly powerful as a method to save on work, to save on nutrition, to save on greenhouse gases being released. I mean, it's like running a car motor if it's not perfectly balanced when you're making a compost heap. And this has been documented. So yeah, and I mean, if you look at the methane that comes off of a woody compost heap, it's enough to run a house on the range and the heating and then the vehicle. Jean-Pen Martin, Jean-Pen, through Jean-Martin Fortier in there, but Jean-Pen proved this already. It's like woody compost heaps put off so much methane that could be, I mean, if you're pairing that woody compost, giving it the right surface area, and then you're having it regularly sprayed on top as it percolates up, as those breakdown releases come up, you could actually start breaking things down. But as if it's aerated, you won't really have those problems as much. It's when it gets anaerobic that it really releases those things. So it's really important to understand these workarounds, these secrets. And that's why I wanted to share them with you all. And one last one. When you're working with all this stuff, be ready to chop and drop it down so that you can have it all touching the soil, feeding the soil web, and giving back to your system. So this book, The Permaculture Student 2, it's on Amazon. It's on my website for a limited time, signed and on sale, way cheaper than Amazon. I think $15, $20 cheaper. But it has everything. It's got all the recipes for EM, for bokashi, and bokashi is just organic matter, very specific organic matter that has been inoculated with the EM, so that you can scale it up, so that you can embody it and put it in place and have it not be washed away. So it's very powerful. And then there's advanced techniques in here too. I mean, people are making bokashi balls and putting them in aquatic zones, having miraculous things happen, having species that were lost come back. amazing things are happening, and it's early days though. So I want you to know about it before, before it comes around the bend, so that you can start acting now, so that you can start healing your soils, growing better food, growing better bodies, better families, better lives, livelihoods, and futures. So this has been Soil Solutions and Soil Secrets. I'm going to pop over here and see what questions you all have. All right. What could you do in a place like the Mojave Desert, like Joshua Tree? So the cool thing about those areas is you can dig down and do your compost heaps in pits. And it works really well. And maybe you're putting a cover over it. I had actually a wood top on mine, so I'd uncover it and add stuff to it. And it was a vermicompost. I had it shaded. So a shaded pit compost in the Mojave Desert would serve best. And so, yeah, that's what I would be doing. I would keep it out of the ambient temp range. I would go down into the earth, take it down to the cooler temps, because there are cooler temps down there. Absolutely. Or I'm looking at your questions. If you have bacterial dominated soil, should I inoculate it with fungal dominated teas? Well, what are you trying to do? I mean, essentially that's what it comes down to, is, are you putting in a perennials and a food forest? Then yeah, absolutely. Organic matter, the denser and woodier the materials that's all made out of, the better. The lighter those materials are, the more their grasses, straws, and all that kind of stuff, the more it'll be bacterial dominant. So the mulch we lay down is really critical, because we're feeding the system, pushing it one way or the other. We're always doing something. We're always gardening, whether we intend to or not. Yeah, and so also indica dogo, going back to the whole idea of native plants, in reality, it's all the plants forming their guilds to each microbiome that actually is the effect that we want. So if you're going to have, your wilding focus as your theme, focus in guilds. So you're like, well, I want an oak tree with, you know what I mean, with this, this, and this. That's your claw, your unit, and you're going plop, 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 and you're putting that on contour maybe, and then, oh, lo and behold, all these other species start appearing that fill in the gaps that are necessary, right, to create the full relationship between all those things. And it's that guild that we really want, that becomes the dynamic accumulation, because we get so much more when it's community-based work that is happening, an economy, rather than individual plants. Thinking about individual plants is useful, no doubt, but we enter a completely different arena, a different level, when we're like, well, I want cowpeas, I want C4 grasses, I want buckwheat, I want Daikon radish. You know what I mean? When you do that and you're like, boom, 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 and then you're hitting it with the soil food web, and then it's like, there's like this gestalt buildup of secondary energy and syntropy that just can't be denied. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying with just have fun. So yeah, if you got soil, you don't know how it was cared for, you want to use the EM. You want to make sure that the EM is what you use. Why? This is a really good, important point, and thank you for mentioning that. Just having fun. Number two, um, these amazing organisms have what some people say, the ability to make the heavy metals and some of these harder to get rid of compounds go away. Now, there is no way. So we're trying to figure out what is going on, but obviously it's doing something that happens in other contexts. So when we look at heavy metals, when we look at toxins, they get tied up in colloids and become immobilized at certain levels of organic matter. And so, and obviously radioactive materials, there's certain caveats to a lot of things. So, and they've got their own unique levels, right? Because they're radioactive materials. But when we're talking about a lot of the heavy metals, a lot of the toxins, EM has the ability to make them suddenly not appear. And what that says to me is that they're being tied up in the colloids, just like organic matter does. And so it's not showing up in the soluble nutrients. It's gone. It's not gone. It combined with something. And so if it's composting and it goes gone, it's being tied up in the carbon chains from whence they came. So they're inert. And if they're being trapped by organic matter, they're in the colloids. And with the EM, it could be a little bit of both. We don't know. But what we do know is it's being used to great effect for dealing with these things. Purple non-sulfur bacteria is found in like manure lagoons, compost waste dumps, really trying circumstances, but thriving, digesting things. So that's what I was meaning, that if you're in a place that is uncertain, spray it with EM. Get the bokashi down there, get the biochar down there, get the organic matter up, get the compost teas going, but make sure EM is part of that equation because of its X factor, because of the fact that it does things that nothing else can do that we know of currently. Nice. Yeah, so Douglas Stewart asked how much water is required. Well, if you're going down into the ground and if you've chipped it and you've created enough and you've mixed in enough stuff that breaks down or is spongy, like punky wood or some brush annuals, those kinds of things, you'll be able to hold the water better. But you do need to have water that needs to stay wet in order to keep breaking down. And then under the fir trees, make sure those fir trees aren't too close to your house, right? Fire. And then make sure your fir trees, you're trimming up 16 to 18 feet high. So if there's fires, they pass through and don't get up into the canopies. And the crown fires, those are the unstoppable fires. It's the low, cool burning fires that just pass on through and everyone's cool. Do you have a good source of bulk seed for daikon? That Daikon Radish seed was actually the bulk source for Baker Creek. I got that a while back, and it used to be full. So that's what's left after sharing it with a lot of people and planting a lot. So yeah, I would look at I don't know if they do bulk, but I'm sure they would if you called and asked. You know what I mean? If even if they don't have it on their website, I would just call and ask because they did it for me, and so I'm sure they could do it for you. All right. Do you guys have any other questions? I am going to post a link to the book I was referring to that whole time, so you all can download it yourself. You all are so welcome. Thank you for joining us for Permaculture Gardening Live, Soil Solutions and Secrets. This was super fun. It was awesome to have you all with us. Some people are watching remotely from inside the course. Some people are watching with us here. If you're watching from inside the course, know that you can always click on the bottom right and have YouTube jump you right here so that you can see the chat, the top chat comments. Thank you so much for participating. And yeah, if you'd like to learn more, there's that link. I also have permaculture gardening course, which it's in the description as well if you want to go check that out and learn all the stuff in depth. And join us regularly on our monthly lives. So thank you so much. I'm Matt Powers. Grow abundantly, learn daily, and live regeneratively. And have a great week and great month.